I ran away from my parents to live my own life. I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere. And then he showed up. The cabin came with a leaning porch and a door that stuck in damp weather. Pine pitch sweetened the air, and smoke from my wood stove curled out of a crooked tin pipe like a lazy serpent. The floorboards complained with every step, loud enough, I like to think, to scare off anything with bad intentions. I kept my table by the window, where the glass was old and wavy, and made the trees look like they were swaying even when the wind stopped to listen. On the table, a chipped mug, a pocket knife, and a bowl of dried rosemary, sage, and crushed spruce tips. I worked the herbs with my fingers until their scent got into the skin. I brewed the rest into a bitter tea that tasted like green ash and stubbornness. Mask the scent. Keep your head down. Live small. Those were my rules, and for 3 months I obeyed them better than I'd obeyed anyone my entire life. I told myself I didn't miss anything. Not the city noise that stacked on itself like bad chords. Not the constant hovering of people convinced they knew what was best for me. Definitely not the pity that crept into voices when they realized what I was and decided it told them who I should be. I chopped wood in the mornings, skinned my knuckles more often than I'd admit, and learned which birds tattled and which minded their own business. In the evenings, I read by the stove until the letters blurred and my eyelids slid down like shutters. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The creek started 20 minutes from the cabin, tumbling over rocks clear as glass and mean as knives. I went there to rinse the smoke from my hair and refill my canteens. The path was a braid of deer tracks and fallen needles. My boots learned it the way a hand learns a lover's back. That afternoon, the air was cold enough to make breath visible. The sun snagged on the tops of the pines and threw a net of gold across the water. I crouched to dip a canteen and felt it. That prickling, like static working its way up the spine. Someone watching. I didn't hear him arrive. No snap of twigs, no swish of brush. A ripple of silence in the forest. And then he was there on the opposite bank, tall enough to make the trees consider standing straighter. Dark hair, a few days past tidy. Broad shoulders under a jacket that had seen weather and didn't complain. He looked like the kind of man who could carry a log one-handed, and forget to mention it. His eyes were gray, the kind that register everything and react to nothing. They steadied on me, and something inside me steadied back without asking permission. No. Absolutely not. I screwed the canteen lid down too tight because my fingers had turned clumsy. Lose your map, giant? I said, because sarcasm is a perfectly valid survival strategy. One corner of his mouth moved, like my joke had been a memory he didn't mind revisiting. No map, he said. His voice belonged to late nights and steady fires. Ronan. Great. A name. People with names had a way of thinking they could come back. Sam, I said, not offering a hand. Hands can be read, and mine had too much to say. This is private land. It is, he agreed, like that settled something for him. I patrol it. Ah, I said. So you're the local neighborhood watch. Do you also ticket squirrels for speeding? His gaze drifted, not rudely, over my clothes, my boots, the herb stains on my fingers. I felt heat crawl up my neck, and my heart thudded with an irritating idea of rhythm. He wasn't throwing his weight around, wasn't soaking the air with dominance like so many alphas did to see who flinched first. He didn't need to. Something older than posture moved through him. The kind of quiet you only get at the heart of a storm. My skin recognized it before my brain could translate. Beneath my ribs, the wolf that lived at the edges of my bones lifted its head, curious and appalled. Don't you dare, I told it. We talked about this. His eyes held mine. Not a challenge. A statement. He knows. A small, sensible panic dashed across my chest and hid behind my lungs. I pushed the canteen into my backpack and stood. Well, Ronan who patrols, you've met the resident hermit. I'm sure that fulfills your daily quota of social interactions. He didn't move. He looked at the creek as if deciding whether water wanted company. You're new, he said. And careful. Some of us learn that careful is cheaper than consequences. Some of us, he echoed. A crow hopped along a branch overhead, tilting its head as if it, too, was evaluating my life choices. The scent of spruce sharpened. My tea had left a bitter film on my tongue that no amount of bravado could scrub away. I could feel him feeling me. Not the intrusive push I'd endured before, alphas turning the air into a room with only one exit. This was presence. He took up space like a mountain takes up the horizon, not apologizing, not insisting. Just there. And my traitor body responded. Heat, low in my stomach. A hum under my skin. I clamped down on it so hard my jaw ached. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But he didn't lean in, didn't press. "Roof of your cabin needs a new ridge cap," he said, conversational. Like we were neighbors discussing weather. "Storm last week peeled it back." I blinked. "Are you also spying on my shingles? Or do they text you updates?" "Walked the ridge at dawn," he said. "Saw tar paper." I hated that he was right. I hated more that the picture of him walking the ridge at dawn walked into my head without knocking. "You don't have to fix it," I said, failing to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "I'm not a charity case. I didn't say I would." "Good," I snapped, and then wanted to throw my canteen at my own face. He was silent for a beat, long enough for the water to voice an opinion around stones. "You mask well," he said softly, as if commenting on my knife work or my knots. Every hair on my arms stood up. I laughed, the sound a little too bright. "I wear cologne." Forest Hermit No. 5. All the rage in Paris. His mouth almost smiled again. I smelled Paris once. "This isn't it." The wolf inside me pressed forward, nose to the glass of my self-control. Not to beg. To confirm. It had already drawn conclusions my pride refused to sanction. I took a step back anyway. "Congratulations on having a good nose," I said. "Now use it to sniff out literally any other direction." His eyes warmed by half a degree. "I'm not here to corner you, Sam." "Great. Because I bite." "I know," he said, with a quiet certainty that made heat and embarrassment tangle. "And you run." That arrow landed where it was supposed to. He didn't have to know how recently I'd run, or how often, or how long I'd sworn I wouldn't again. He glanced toward the trees downstream, nose tilting to catch a thread of wind. The gray in his gaze hardened. A stone dropped into deep water. "You should head back before dusk," he said. "We've had strangers testing the boundary." "Strangers," I repeated. "What, like tourists looking for the world's saddest Airbnb?" "Not that kind." I wanted to ask what kind, but asking would be admitting I took advice. I shrugged instead, as if my pulse hadn't jumped. I can see that." He shifted, a small redistribution of weight that somehow made the air less tight. "If you need anything, tools, a ladder. My people are 2 miles east." "Your people." The words should have scraped. They didn't. I hated that. "I won't," I said. He nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable boundary, and not a dare he intended to fail. "Then I'll see you around?" "I'd rather you didn't." Another almost smile. "That's not how around works." He turned, fluid for a man his size, and the forest took him back with the same quiet it had given him to me. When he was gone, the crows started talking again, gossiping in the blackleaf language they loved. I stood there too long, letting the cold touch my bones just so I could prove I didn't shiver because of him. Finally, I hiked back, every board on the porch announcing my return like a small-town radio. The cabin smelled like smoke and rosemary and the particular loneliness that follows unexpected conversation. I set the kettle on because that was what I could control, and rubbed another pinch of crushed spruce into my wrists. Mask the scent, live small. But when I looked at the door, I could picture a man too big for the frame, patient as winter. My wolf pressed its ear to the world and listened to footsteps that weren't there. "No," I told it. "We are not doing this." Somewhere in the trees, far off but not far enough, a howl threaded the dusk, low, steady, unafraid of its own echo. It wasn't a demand. It was a promise. I told myself I didn't understand promises in that language anymore. My heart, inconsiderate as always, answered anyway. The roof started leaking 2 days after that first encounter. Not a big leak, just enough to remind me that nature was patient, not polite. Every storm tried a new angle, and eventually, one would win. I patched it with tar paper, muttering curses at the shingles that flapped like lazy flags. It wasn't pretty, but it kept the bed dry. And that was good enough. The next morning, I came back from splitting kindling to find a stack of fresh-cut logs neatly arranged by the porch. I hadn't put them there. I froze, hand tightening around the axe handle. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. My pulse ticked high, as if expecting trouble. And then, I saw him. Ronan. Leaning against a tree, arms crossed, like he'd been waiting to be noticed. His jacket smelled faintly of pine smoke and rain, and the silence bent around him like it had at the creek. "You have a talent for trespassing," I said, shoving the axe blade into the chopping block for emphasis. Should I start charging rent? I don't trespass, he answered evenly. I patrol. Yeah, well, congratulations on patrolling my firewood. That's private property. His eyes flicked to the crooked line of my roof. And, a roof in trouble. I don't need a building inspector, I snapped. Or a lumberjack, or a omega. He said it like weather. A simple condition. Cold front coming in. My throat closed before the rage could get out. When it finally did, it came sharp and too loud. You don't get to say that. You don't get to call me that. He didn't flinch, didn't smirk, didn't press dominance into the air until I bent. He just looked at me. Gray eyes steady. As if acknowledging the obvious wasn't cruelty, just fact. That made me angrier. Do you know how much effort I put into hiding it? The teas, the herbs, I waved my hand at the rosemary bundles hanging crooked above the stove inside. And you stroll up like a damn census taker, ticking boxes? It isn't about hiding, he said, calm as the creek. It's about living. You're still doing one, not the other. I wanted to throw the axe. At him, at the roof, at the part of me that wanted to hear what else he thought he knew. Instead, I spun toward the woodpile. I don't need you. I manage on my own. The axe slipped as if eager to make a liar out of me. The handle cracked at the neck, splintering against the block. The blade clattered into the dirt. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I bent down, swearing under my breath, and felt his shadow move closer. By the time I straightened, he'd already picked up the spare axe I kept leaned against the porch rail. He tested the weight once, then drove it into a log with practiced rhythm. Wood split neat and clean. Hey! I barked. That's mine. Now it's useful, he said, stacking the halves with the tidy efficiency of a man who could turn anything into order. I crossed my arms. I said I manage. You do, he allowed. And I help. That was it. No push. No because I'm alpha, you'll obey. Just two plain words. I help. As if it were voluntary for both of us. My wolf paced inside, uneasy. It wasn't used to this. Neither was I. You don't get points for chopping wood, I muttered. This isn't some rustic dating show. One corner of his mouth twitched. Good. I don't like competition shows. Sarcasm, I discovered, slid right off him. Which only made me want to try harder. I grabbed a log, set it on the block, and reached for the busted axe before remembering it was now a pile of splinters. Damn it. Ronan slid the good axe toward me without a word. His fingers brushed the handle once, deliberate and steady, like he was handing over more than wood and steel. I took it because refusing would have been petty even for me. The handle still held his warmth, and I hated that my palms noticed. Swing. Crack. The log split, ragged but effective. I stacked the pieces, refusing to meet his gaze. My pulse was ridiculous, hammering as if I'd run miles instead of moving an axe 5 feet. We worked in silence for a while, trading turns. The pile grew higher, neat and square. The sun angled through the trees, and for a moment it felt almost like rhythm, like something two people might share without barbed edges. Dangerous thought. I shoved it aside. Finally I dropped the axe against the block. Don't mistake this for acceptance. You don't get to claim me. His answer was quiet but carried more weight than shouting ever could. I won't claim you. That's not how I lead. I blinked, thrown off balance. Alphas I'd known before prided themselves on control. They soaked the air in commands, flexed their rank like muscle. Ronan stood there, shoulders broad, eyes calm, and somehow the absence of pressure pressed harder than any dominance ever had. You're really bad at this whole alpha thing, I said. Because humor was safer than honesty. Aren't you supposed to posture and grunt until I swoon? Do you swoon often? He asked. Never. Then why waste effort? That simple, infuriating logic made my chest tight. I huffed, snatched the axe back, and shoved another log into place. Inside me the wolf lifted its head again, not in fear, but in curiosity. Recognition. I bit down hard on the impulse, on the warmth creeping in. He wasn't like the others. And that unsettled me more than all the fangs and commands in the world. Because what do you do with an alpha who doesn't order you? Because if he didn't try to cage me, what excuse would I have to run? The village sat in a shallow bowl of land, where the pines pulled back to let light in. Stone houses huddled together, smoke rising in blue ribbons from their chimneys. Somewhere, a hammer met. A nail with the stubborn optimism of people who trusted roofs. Children's laughter darted between doorways like sparrows. It was almost offensively wholesome. I should have turned around. Ronan walked at an easy pace beside me, which meant I had to take 2 steps for his one to keep up. The trail widened into a main road packed hard by years of feet and paws. People looked up as we passed. Heads tilted. Noses flared. The sound hit me before the meaning, an almost silent shift in breath. The barest change in posture. Omegas lowered their gazes, shoulders rounding. Alphas straightened, subtle as magnetized needles finding north. I felt the current try to decide what I should be. My spine did its favorite trick and locked. I met the first pair of curious eyes dead on. A woman by a well wiped her hands on her apron. The movement neat and practiced. Her scent was soft with flour and soap. Omega. She glanced at Ronan, then at me, and dipped her head, not to me but toward him, as if I were a parcel he'd carry a while. Something sour bubbled in my throat. On a porch, 2 men leaned against the rail. Warriors, by the easy way they owned their muscles. One took a long look at me, then smirked. Didn't know we were running an inn for strays. The other snorted. Smells. Interesting. Smells like mind your own business, I said, before Ronan could be diplomatic at them. The smirker's brows lifted. He talks, he also hears, I said. And bites. Silence rippled outward. The sort that gathers when a dropped glass thinks about shattering. A few heads turned fully now. The Omega at the well ducked her chin lower, as if apologizing for my existence. Ronan's voice arrived before his body did. No one is astray here, he said, calm as a winter lake. He didn't raise his volume, yet the village heard him. I watched it happen. The way sound carries farther when it knows where it's going. And you don't comment on a guest's scent. The second man's smirk evaporated like fog under sun. Apologies, Alpha. Ronan didn't look at me when he said Alpha. He didn't need to. The title did a thing to the air, tightened it, then loosened it, like a hand adjusting a collar that fit better afterward. No pressure, just order. I wanted to be immune. I wasn't. A boy darted past us, nearly colliding with Ronan's leg, then yelped when he realized the wall he'd hit had opinions. He skidded to a stop and blinked up, eyes bright with the fearless curiosity of someone who'd never been punished for it. Sorry, he said, not sorry at all. His gaze pinged to me. Hi. Are you new? No, I said solemnly. I'm ancient. He grinned, revealing a missing tooth like a proud gap in a picket fence. You talk weird. You run fast. He beamed and tore off again. Children? I muttered. Agents of chaos. They tell the truth, Ronan said. I rolled my eyes. So do agents of chaos. We passed a long building with open doors, the smell of leather and oil drifting out. Workshop. A woman with a scar along her jaw looked up from a bench, nodded at Ronan with the respect that lives in bone, not in fear, and then assessed me like a puzzle with too many corner pieces. You bring us work, she said dryly. That roof of yours is a crime. I'm a repeat offender, I replied. I can fix crime, she said. For a fee. Put it on his tab, I said, jerking my thumb at Ronan. Sam, he warned, but there was a smile flickering under the word, the kind that warmed more than it should. That should have been my first omen. My second came a moment later, when an older man shuffled out from behind a stack of firewood, with the immaculate timing of a villain in a cautionary tale. He wore the heavy smell of dominance, like a coat that had fit once, and was now mostly moth holes. Alpha, and not subtle about it. Ronan, he boomed. No need for greetings when you could announce yourself. His gaze slid to me, and I felt it like a cheap fabric snagging. You've collected a little guest. I gave him my best bored cat face. Do you greet everyone like a misplaced teapot, or am I special? A few people coughed into their hands. Ronan didn't sigh, he was too controlled to give anyone that satisfaction, but the air around him shifted by a micron. The older Alpha's lips thinned. Our Omegas know their place. Good for them, I said. I know mine too. Not on your porch. The village held its breath. It was a strange sensation, standing in a place built on the spine of hierarchy and refusing to bow. It made every instinct grind its teeth, made the wolf in me brace for impact. Ronan stepped forward, not between us but in a line that intersected the older man's attention and redirected it like water around stone. Amen, he said, still that calm river voice. We don't say place about people. Eamon's jaw worked. He wasn't used to losing ground he thought was his. When did we start letting... Now, Ronan said, not loudly, not sharply. The word just found the center of the space and sat there, all gravity. We start now. It didn't feel like tyranny. It felt like a door quietly closing on a room I didn't want to enter anyway. Eamon's nostrils flared. He glanced around, calculating whether the village would side with him. But people's eyes were on Ronan, and what I saw there wasn't fear, it was relief. The old man swallowed a retort and stepped back with poor grace. Alpha, he muttered, conceding the board without flipping it. I exhaled a breath I hadn't meant to hold. My hands tingled, adrenaline searching for a door. I hated that I was grateful. I hated more that I'd expected to need rescuing from him too. We moved on, the moment folding itself into the stack of small, sharp memories I didn't want but kept anyway. A pair of omegas arranging baskets by a doorway pretended to be interested in apples. One peeked up through her lashes, curiosity and caution arguing behind her eyes. I gave her a nod meant to say, "We can be more than one thing." She didn't return it. Not yet. By the time we reached the far end of the village, my nerves had worn down to wires. We stopped by a stone wall where the road turned back toward the woods. Beyond, the land opened into a patchwork of meadow and pine shade, sky pressed close as a palm. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "It came out rougher than intended." "Yes," Ronan said simply. "I did." Anger stirred. Old habit. Wrong target. "I don't need you to protect you," he supplied, not as a boast, but as a question we both recognized. "Claim me," I said. The word tasted like blood I didn't want to admit I'd bitten down on. "Own me. Choose verbs that look like cages." "I didn't," he said. "I won't. You keep saying that." I squinted at him. "Is this some kind of reverse psychology? Next you'll tell me to run away so I'll want to stay." He took that in with the tiny infuriating patience of men who learn to count to 10 before lifting heavy things. "If you want to leave, I'll walk you to the boundary and make sure you cross it safe." I stared at him. "That's terrible strategy. I'm not hunting you." "Good, because you're almost 40. Shouldn't you be thinking about a blanket and a fireplace by now? Maybe a rocking chair where you sigh and remember your youth." His mouth did the ghost of a smile. "I have a blanket. And a fireplace. A beat. No rocking chair? Tragic." "You can get me one," he said mildly. "Oh, I see." I spread my hands. "Recruiting me for your senior comfort committee. Someone has to remind me when to take my vitamins." "That'll be the day," I said, but the banter folded something tight in me and made it looser. A rope uncoiling. A window cracked just enough to let the room breathe. We stood there for a moment with the village at our backs and the trees ahead. The wind brought the clean bite of snow from higher ground, even though the sun still had some warmth left to spend. My wolf shifted, a small circle in the straw of my ribs, and set its head down. Not asleep, not ready to bolt. "You led without shouting," I said finally, as if complaining. "That's new." "It isn't," he said. "You just haven't seen it before." The honesty in that made me look away. The meadow shivered, green and gold. Home should be a place, I thought. Maybe it could be a way somebody spoke to you. "Don't get ideas," I warned, mostly myself. "I'm not your pet." "I know," he said. "You're Sam." It was the simplest thing he'd said all day. It landed like a promise I didn't consent to, and still wanted. We started back toward the trees. The village noise picked up behind us. Hammers, laughter, the sigh of a world that knew its own weather. I walked beside the alpha who didn't command, carrying my prickle of pride like a thorn crown, and pretending I didn't notice that it hurt less than it used to. On the far edge of the territory, the forest changed its posture. The pines leaned closer to one another, whispering. The light came down in narrower blades, and the ground went soft with old needles that swallowed sound. Even the air had a different weight, like a room after a stranger leaves, when you can still feel the dent they made in the chair. I'd come out to check the snares I kept for rabbits and the peace I pretended I had in abundance. The first snare was empty. The second held a loop of wind and nothing else. The third had a tuft of fur caught in the knot, fresh, except the fur wasn't rabbit. Too coarse. My fingers remembered the texture even as my brain filed objections. Wolves had passed here. Not ours. I straightened slowly, every loud human motion wrapped in carefulness. On the breeze, the scents separated like notes in a chord, resin-rich pine, damp earth, the iron of a distant creek, and faint but wrong. Oil, metal polish, something sweet and chemical as if a factory had sneezed. My nose wanted to reject it outright. My stomach agreed. Footsteps approached. Several sets, quiet in the way quiet gets when it's practiced. I crouched behind a deadfall and considered how many life choices I could regret at once. Then Ronan spoke. And the forest let the tension uncoil a little. Northline needs another sweep past the granite shelf, he said. His voice came from the trail behind me, steady as a metronome. Pairs. Rotate every 20. I peered over the log. Ronan stood with 5 others in a small clearing where the path bent like a bow. He wore a canvas jacket, gray shirt, boots that had met most of this mountain, and formed a mutual respect. Around him were warriors I'd glimpsed in the village, Scarjaw from the workshop, the smirker who'd learned what apology tasted like, a young beta, with quick eyes and a braid tight as a promise, and a woman whose scent marked her as alpha, but who held it folded like a knife still sheathed. Tracks along the ridge, the braided beta reported, pointing with 2 fingers. Deep heel, toes light. Carrying weight, maybe a quarter mile's worth, then split. Scouts, the sheathed alpha murmured. Testing for soft spots. Not tourists, Smirker said, grim now. Ronan nodded once, as if each word laid a stone and he was building something with them. East team take the Birch Run. West team I want eyes on the old logging road, no chases past the boundary. Mark, observe, fall back. Scarjaw grunted approval. The others moved without huffing or dramatics, sliding into pairs that made sense, the way hands find tools they like. I watched the arrangement and realized what I was seeing, not just strength, but trust that knew its own history. This wasn't a man with a big voice and bigger ego. This was a center of gravity. You could build a village around that, or a war, and not worry the floorboards would rot. Ronan's gaze lifted, angled through the trees, and hit the exact place I was trying very hard not to be. Sam, he said, not surprised. I considered standing very still and pretending to be Bark. Then I stood up anyway, brushing needles from my knees with dignity that fooled no one. You're not subtle, I said, climbing over the deadfall. You're not hidden, he said, and it wasn't a criticism. It was an acknowledgement of a thing the day had already decided. I looked past him to the trees he'd pointed people toward. What are they carrying? Rumor says rare roots, the sheathed alpha answered, her voice low and skeptical. And certain fungi that do interesting things to blood and patience. Rumor also says they're paid to find what doesn't want to be found, the braided beta added. Old artifacts, old places. I glanced at the chemical tang threading the air. Rumor wears cheap cologne. Smirker snorted. They smell like trucks. Ronan shook his head once at the commentary, then turned to me with that concentration I'd come to recognize. The kind that made you feel simultaneously seen and unpinned. We've had strangers testing the boundary for a week. They're better organized than the usual opportunists. Contrabandists, I said, because the word fit like a shard sliding into place. His mouth tightened. Call them that if you like. Call them trouble, either way. And you're out here to tell the trees about it? I asked. I'm out here to make sure nothing crosses our line, he said. Including you. I bristled, before logic could intervene. I'm not a child. I know, he said. I don't need a leash. I know. Stop agreeing with me, I snapped, which was either ungrateful or a hobby at this point. It ruins the argument. He let a beat pass then. I'm not here to argue. Of course he wasn't. The wolf inside me turned once, restless. I hated that the restlessness included a flicker of safety, as if the ground under my feet had decided to be dependable without asking my permission. Ronan gestured to the broken snare. Don't run your lines past the second creek crossing for a while. If you smell oil or metal, turn back. Don't track. Don't investigate. Come find me or Paige or Mara. He tipped his head toward the sheathed alpha, Mara, and the braided beta, Paige. Paige saluted with 2 fingers. Mara's mouth said nothing, her eyes said all the practical things people say when they like their outcomes to include everyone returning. I swallowed the urge to prove a point none of them had asked me to prove. If they're taking plants, why the boundary? People, Mara said, eyes on the trees. Plants don't fight back. A cold line moved under my skin. The chemical scent seemed closer, suddenly, even though the wind still pushed it toward the ridge. I felt very aware of my own smell, despite the herbs and the careful teas. I'd been so proud of how well I masked. Maybe I'd been fooling the wrong audience. Ronan noticed the way my jaw clenched. Of course he did. You're not a weakness, he said. So simply it could have been a lie if he'd put any polish on it. You're a person. That's a nice slogan for a cooperative, I said, because humor is better armor than silence. Put it on a tote bag. Paige, Ronan said without looking away from me. Order the tote bags. Paige made a choking sound that was half laugh, half cough. On it, boss. It would have been funny if my chest wasn't tight. Anger rose in me, sharp and misdirected. I don't want you reciting rules at me like you're worth keeping safe? He asked, brow lifting a fraction. Like I'm yours to manage, I shot back, because there it was. The old bruise that touched the surface and made everything flinch. You don't get to draw a circle around me and call it protection. I didn't draw a circle, he said. I marked a line. Is that supposed to make me feel free? It's supposed to keep you alive, he said. And for the first time today, something hard edged his voice. Not command, not possession, but the kind of fear that wears good boots and knows the trails by heart. I don't want to find your scent on a trail that ends. The words landed exactly where I kept my pulse. It made me furious how much they landed. I can handle myself. I've seen that, he said. I'm asking you to let us handle what's ours. I'm not, I started, ready to battle grammar and implication both. Our territory, he amended, cleanly, before my temper could find a foothold. Our problem. Not your burden to solve alone. Mara's gaze flicked between us, weighing something unasked. He's right about one thing, she said, head edging toward me. You smell like someone who thinks solo is safer. That scent gets predators excited. Change it. How? I asked, thrown despite myself. Come eat with us sometimes, Paige said, like it was obvious. Work in the shop, borrow a jacket, scent his story, tell a different one. I hated that the practical advice felt like a rope thrown over a chasm I refused to admit I stood near. I also hated that I wanted to take it. I'm not moving into your dorms, I muttered. No, Ronan said. You're not. But don't let pride write checks your body can't cash. Did you just dad voice me? I demanded. Is this the part where you suggest curfews and a reflective vest? Stay off the ridge at dusk, he said, ignoring the bait. And if you hear engines where you shouldn't, go the other way. I'm not a child, I repeated, because repeating things sometimes makes them truer. I know, he said again. And somehow managed to make it both agreement and promise. That's why I'm telling you, not dragging you. My mouth opened for a retort that never arrived. The wind shifted, bringing the faint whine of something far, mechanical, then gone. Every head lifted, all at once. The pack moved like a single organism, eyes narrowing, attention tilting. Ronan's hand brushed my sleeve, barely there, a current meeting another and deciding not to collide. Back to your cabin, he said, not a command, a request wrapped in steel. Please. The please did it. Or maybe the idea of engines on our mountain. I nodded, and the relief that flickered across his face was the kind you only see if you're looking for it. They melted into the trees, steps swallowed by the old patient floor of the forest. I stood a moment longer, listening to the quiet struggle with what it might become. Then I turned toward home, every sense strung tight. I told myself I was angry. I told myself I was not his. The truth under both, for the first time in a long time, someone's worry didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a hand on a railing in the dark. I could still walk wherever I wanted. But I didn't let go of it until I saw my door. I'd gotten cocky. Or maybe just careless. Either way, that morning I convinced myself I could slip past the ridgeline. Just long enough to check the creek traps I wasn't supposed to check. No engines. No strange scents on the wind. Just the usual silence of the woods, broken by my own muttered curses at knots that tightened the wrong way. Then the air shifted. Not the quiet of Ronan's arrival, not the weight of a predator I knew. This was slick, chemical, wrong. A twig snapped behind me, too close, too deliberate. I turned. Too late. Two men stepped out of the brush like shadows had decided to grow teeth. Not wolves, at least not pack wolves. Their scents crawled with gasoline, sweat, and a cloying sweetness that felt engineered instead of grown. Contrabandists. Strangers Ronan had warned me about. They looked at me like I was a lottery ticket that had just spoken their names. Easy, one of them said, grin sharp. Don't want to ruin the merchandise. Merchandise. My stomach dropped, then lit up in anger. I bolted sideways, into a thicket. For 3 blessed seconds, I thought maybe I'd make it. Then, an arm like rebar clamped around my middle. I twisted, snarling. Bit down on flesh hard enough to taste copper. He cursed, shaking me, but didn't let go. I'm not your damn rabbit. I shouted, thrashing, kicking dirt, anything to prove I wasn't easy cargo. Spicy, the other one laughed, stepping closer with a coil of rope. Alphas'll pay extra for that. The rope went tight around my wrists. I jerked against it, skin burning. You think I'm going quietly? Newsflash, Omega's bite? Let him. The first one grunted, tightening his grip. Doesn't change what he smells like. And that was the problem. No amount of rosemary or sage could bury it now. Fear and fury had torn open the seams and the air sang with it. My scent was currency, and these men knew the market. They dragged me deeper into the trees, toward the faint hum of an engine hidden under brush. I dug in my heels until my boots left trenches. Hope you brought earplugs, I spat. Because I'm going to talk the whole way. Do you want me to start with wolf trivia? Did you know a grown wolf can bite with 1,200 pounds of force? Let's test that math on your arm. The rope holder shoved me forward. Shut him up. Make me. I snapped, teeth bared. They didn't bother gagging me. Probably figured no one out here would hear. Wrong calculation, because someone did. Back in the village. Ronan froze mid-sentence. He'd been standing by the longhouse, listening to Mara's report about boundary patrols. His head tilted, breath cutting short. His entire body shifted in a single ripple, controlled violence ready to detonate. The air snapped taut around him. What is it? Mara asked, already bracing. Sam. His voice was not calm. Not even close. The warriors nearby stopped what they were doing. Paige's braid swung forward as she jerked her head up. He went out? He's not here, Ronan said, every syllable clipped. And he should be. The moment stretched, silent but full. Then it broke all at once. Ronan's control, legendary, steady, unshakable, fractured. He snarled, low and raw, sound shuddering through the marrow of every wolf in earshot. Heads bowed instinctively, even the air smelled different, charged with storm. All of you, he barked, already moving. South Ridge. Now. No one argued. They didn't have to. For the first time, they saw him not as the unflinching center, but as the wrath circling it. His usual patience was gone, stripped to teeth and fury. The kind of fury that didn't care about lines or boundaries or rules he'd set for himself. Mara fell in step beside him, keeping pace only because he allowed it. What happened? They took him, Ronan growled, chest rising like a furnace bellows. His hands flexed once, claws breaking skin. They touched him. The words made the ground itself seem to recoil. Paige swore under her breath, and sprinted ahead to rally the East Patrol. Scarjaw hefted his axe like the world had just offered him redemption. Ronan's eyes burned cold, not wild but lethal. A predator stripped to its essence. For months, years, he'd led with restraint, with reason. Now, all that discipline collapsed into one singular point. Bring Sam back. He's mine to protect, he said, voice so low only Mara heard it. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a vow, ancient, terrible, unbreakable. And God's help anyone who stood in his way. The engine whined somewhere behind us, muffled under tarps and brush. My wrists burned raw from rope, and every step the contrabandists forced dragged splinters of fear through my ribs. But fear doesn't keep me quiet. It winds me tighter, until the words come sharp as teeth. You know this kidnapping business? I panted as one of them shoved me forward. Very unprofessional. No snacks, no small talk, 1 star. Would not recommend. The bigger one growled. Shut him up. Already tried, the other snapped. He bites. Damn right I do, I muttered, twisting my shoulders against the ropes. Ask your friend's hand. But inside I wasn't laughing. My wolf clawed at the edges of my chest, restless and frantic. It knew something I didn't. Knew someone was coming. Then the forest shifted. Not a sound, not a scent. An atmosphere. Like the moment air changes before lightning, when everything leans toward strike. The contrabandists noticed too. They froze mid-step, heads snapping up, nostrils flaring. What? One started. Too late. Ronan hit the clearing like a force the trees themselves had been holding back. His wolf was in his eyes, burning through the gray, making them storm and steel at once. He moved fast, silent until impact, and then the growl broke free, deep, raw, vibrating marrow. The first man didn't even scream. Ronan's weight slammed him into the ground, claws tearing rope from my wrists as if the fibers had insulted him personally. The other lunged with a knife, but Ronan's hand closed on his wrist and bent until bone cracked like dry wood. The knife fell useless into moss. And then it was quiet. Too quiet. Both men groaning, neither a threat anymore. I should have been terrified. Instead, I was shaking for an entirely different reason. He turned to me. Not the wolf I'd just seen. Not the storm. He looked at me with caution, with a gentleness so sharp it cut deeper than claws. "Sam." His voice was hoarse, scraped by fury and fear. He reached out, then stopped just short of touching my arm, as if asking permission without words. I managed a laugh, weak but defiant. "Took you long enough." I was starting to bond with my kidnappers. His jaw tightened, eyes shuddering with something painful. "Don't joke like that. Not about this. Never." I swallowed, suddenly less steady on my sarcasm. My hands trembled where the rope had bitten into skin. He noticed, of course he did, and finally closed the distance, unwinding the last frayed. Not with hands that could have snapped steel but touched me like spun glass. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Adrenaline," I said quickly. "And maybe the rope burn." "Don't flatter yourself." His lips twitched like he wanted to argue, but what came out was quieter. I thought I was too late. The forest held its breath, and I hated how much I needed his words filling the space. "You weren't," I said, and for once didn't lace it with irony. For a moment we just stood there. Him, a storm barely leashed, me, still pretending I wasn't unraveling from the inside out. And in that pause, something cracked open in me. Not fear, not anger. Recognition. I'd seen alphas strut, command, force. I'd lived under their weight, had it pressed into my lungs until I believed submission was the only oxygen I could breathe. But Ronan? This was different. His wolf wasn't chained, it was here, full, fierce, but aimed outward, not down. Against threat, not me. The true alpha. Not a tyrant. A shield. I felt my resistance falter, not in defeat but in relief. My wolf pressed forward, no longer clawing for escape but leaning, ears flat in surrender that wasn't subjugation, it was trust. The ropes fell completely away. He held my wrist a moment longer, thumb grazing the red marks, then let go. Not claiming. Releasing. I wasn't afraid they'd hurt me, I admitted, the words dragging out of me like roots. Not really. I was afraid you'd think I was weak. That you'd treat me like a thing, a prize to guard, a pet. His gaze sharpened, storm breaking into something clearer. He shook his head once, firm enough to end an argument before it started. "You're not a thing, Sam." His voice was rough, like gravel carried by water, steady and certain. "You're not an object to own, pairing, bonding. It isn't a cage, it's a home. A home." The word hit like warmth after frost. Too simple, too dangerous. My throat tightened, and I laughed too quickly to hide it. "That's a very poetic sales pitch, Ronan. You sure you're not moonlighting as a Hallmark card?" "Hallmark doesn't swear as much as I do," he said, dry as tinder, and somehow that humor, quiet, unfussy, kept me standing. Behind us, the contrabandists groaned again. Ronan's expression hardened in their direction, and for a second I glimpsed the storm again. Then he looked back at me, and all the sharpness dulled into care. "We'll take them back," he said. "The pack needs to see what happens when someone crosses our line." I almost argued. But I didn't. Not because I suddenly liked being told what to do. Because for the first time, I realized he wasn't telling me. He was including me. As if I stood inside the hour, and not outside it. My chest ached with how much I wanted to believe that. "Fine," I said, voice hoarse. "But if I trip on the way back, you're carrying me." He met my gaze, steady, unflinching. "Then, I'll carry you." It wasn't dominance. It wasn't a trap. It was a promise. And I realized, to my horror and my relief, that part of me wanted him to. The forest was quiet again. Not empty. The usual chorus of ravens, wind through pine and the steady pulse of water over stone returned, but quiet in the way that meant balance. The contrabandists were gone, their stench erased by fire and distance. The pack moved through the village with shoulders a little lighter, laughter returning in cautious bursts like deer stepping back into a meadow. I should have felt the same relief. Instead, I hovered on the edge of unease, restless as a wolf in a too small room. Because I still hadn't decided. Leaving had always been my default. Walk before you're pushed. Run before they chain you. Don't wait for the disappointment to arrive with your name on it. I'd been rehearsing exits since the first time someone told me what an omega should be. And yet, I stood at the cabin door, watching the sunset pull fire through the tree line, and knew I wasn't alone. Not just because Ronan had stationed warriors nearby. Not guards, not jailers, just watchful shapes moving the way loyalty moves. But because every time I closed my eyes, I still saw the way he'd looked at me after tearing my captors apart, like the fury had been for them, but the gentleness had been for me alone. That did something dangerous to my ribs. Footsteps approached, heavy enough to identify before scent did. Ronan didn't knock. He never did. He paused though, as if giving the door the courtesy of deciding whether to open. I did it for him, because pretending I wasn't waiting would have been pointless. "Patrol's quiet," he said. His voice carried none of the storm from before. Just gravel and calm. "That's good." My hands fidgeted with the hem of my shirt, as if the fabric had suddenly developed fascinating edges. "Means I can finally think without you stomping around." He arched one brow, faint amusement breaking the line of his face. "And what do you think about?" I hated how transparent I was. "Leaving?" The word hung between us like frost. He didn't flinch. Didn't protest. Just nodded once, as if the thought had occurred to him too. "If that's what you want, I'll walk you to the boundary myself." No plea. No tether. Just a door open wide. It should have made leaving easier. Instead, it made my throat ache. "Why do you do that?" I demanded. "Why don't you, I don't know, try to convince me. Tell me I'm safer here. That you need me, something?" He studied me, eyes gray as storm clouds about to choose whether to break. "Because you're not a possession. I don't need you to stay, I want you to. There's a difference." The wolf inside me stirred, not restless this time but listening. I turned away, staring at the floorboards like they had answers. I've spent my whole life being told what to be. Good little Omega, perfect mate, the quiet one, the compliant one, the one who fits in the corner of someone else's story. I ran because I thought it was the only way to have myself at all. "And now?" he asked, softer. "Now?" My chest felt like a cracked door, letting light in against my will. "Now I don't feel trapped. Not with you. And that scares me more than any cage." Silence stretched, full of the unspoken things we both carried. Then Ronan stepped closer, slow enough to refuse intimidation. His hand lifted, hovering near mine, waiting. I let my fingers brush his, and the contact was a spark I didn't want to admit I needed. "You're right to be scared," he said. "Freedom is always a choice. It's not something I give you, it's something you take. And if you stay, Sam, it's because you chose. Not because I kept you." The words landed deep. And for the first time I realized I wasn't rehearsing an exit. I was weighing a door that didn't need to slam shut behind me. I breathed out, shaky, but steadier by the end. "Then, I'm staying." The corner of his mouth softened, not quite a smile. More like relief learning how to breathe. "Good. Don't get smug," I warned. "This doesn't mean I'm your tame Omega. It just means I'm here. With you." That's all I asked. We stood there with dusk settling around us, the smell of pine and hearth smoke folding into something that felt, God help me, like home. And because I couldn't resist, I added, "But just so we're clear, this does not mean I'll be cooking you breakfast every day." Something flickered in his eyes, humor finally, after all the gravity. "Then I'm lucky," he said, dry as kindling. "Because I cook better than you." I barked a laugh, half disbelieving. "You? Mr. Grim and Stoic, flipping pancakes?" "Not pancakes," he said. "Biscuits. You'll see." The image was so absurd it rooted warmth in my chest. For once, I didn't push it away. We let the silence settle again, not heavy this time but light, like a blanket shared. The pack was safe. The night was calm. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't planning to run. Because staying wasn't surrender. It was choosing. And I'd chosen him.